Hello everyone, this is the second part, U.S. versus China, the war you can't see. And so far I went back a little bit, as we saw at the end of the last one, and so far I've been blown away at the fact of the size of the microchips and all of the, I want to call them semiconductors, the little, you know what I'm talking about. I don't remember if semiconductor was the name, which I think it was, the chip and then the semiconductors. Yes. Billions of them inside of that, and they can fit on your fingertip. That's ridiculous. I'm sorry, it is utterly ridiculous. Okay, back to the video.
Business, but the actual making of the chip happened in Taiwan. But as 92% of all advanced chips are now made in Taiwan, what this means is that the US is completely reliant on TSMC, basically. And finally, we're getting to the conflict. This is where China becomes really important. Because China, the most populous country, is suddenly very rich. And they want new tech too. So they become actually a giant customer of all these chips, buying 40% of all the chips in the world, meaning that they are now reliant on the US, who is reliant on Taiwan, to design and make their chips. So let's look at the modern chip industry as it all comes together, which is going to set the stage for how this conflict is playing out today. Here's a very simplified version of the supply chain. Again, very simplified. It's just insane. I'm not going to go into the full thing. The US is the one that manufactures the machines, the software, and the designs. Japan makes metals and chemicals for chips. The Netherlands makes this crazy UV laser machine that is used to carve the chips. And Taiwan, crucially, does the expensive, tedious job of actually making the chip. Almost all of the most advanced chips in the world are made in Taiwan. And then you have China, who is the giant customer in all of this. They're the ones who are buying more and more chips to grow their economy. I mean, look at this beautiful supply chain. You've got a bunch of countries that are involved now. Everyone has a part to play, and everyone depends on each other for chips. Globalization is great. Economic interdependence is a recipe for peace and mutual prosperity.
Nope.
Right? I mean, it used to be. But there's something else happening with the supply chain that might be hard to see in this diagram, which is that the US is still the kingpin of this system. They're the most important player. They have the most important ingredients, the best designs, the best software, and the most machines to make chips. Taiwan, their bestie, has the second most important ingredients in all of this, the fabs that actually make the chips. China, on the other hand, is in a position of weakness. Their role is basically the big hungry chip consumer, totally reliant on their frenemy, the United States, and their annoying neighbor, Taiwan, who they want to invade, but now they're reliant on for cutting-edge chips. And what's at stake here for China? Well, it's not just their economy. They don't want chips just so they can have a bunch of cool tech. They want it because more and more, they need advanced chips for their military. So it's like the 2010s, China's military is getting kind of scary, but it's not that scary, says the US. We're not that worried. We'll always be ahead of China when it comes to controlling the supply chain, and our military gets first dibs on all the best chips. China has no chance of catching up ever. And this is true. China was truly behind. They did not have the tech and the designs and the companies and the ability to make advanced chips. They were reliant on the United States. If China pissed off the US, they could just take away their chips. And now, we have a rising conflict on our hands.
I understand that China also makes chips. From what I've heard before, they make chips, but they make lower end chips. They're like basic, because clearly they don't have the designs that we do and all this and that, and they don't have the manufacturing that Taiwan does. So they make their own chips, but these chips are just, they're basic. They would be something that they might sell to North Korea, and North Korea would think it was like, you could not get better. You know, you're going to sell to them, to countries that can't afford the real deal, but they are getting something that does work in a way. My understanding, I could be wrong.
China, this big superpower, is not going to let this happen. They realize that they have to do two things. Number one, they have to start making their own chips. They want to break free and stop relying on the US for anything. Make their own chips so that the US doesn't have leverage over them. And number two, and deeply related, is they want to continue to build up their military, to modernize it, to build more warships and satellites and high-tech missiles and drones and eventually AI. All of this needs advanced chips, which they don't have. So they're like, we are gonna make them on their own. And the US is like, good luck, China. You're so far behind. Good luck trying to figure out how to do this thing that we've spent the past 60 years figuring out how to do, make really expensive chips. Experts in software and machinery and fabs, like, you have no chance. So how is China gonna catch up? Lucky for them, in China, there's a blurry line between businesses and the military. It's all kind of overseen by the state. And also lucky for them, there are loads of US tech companies that are addicted to making money by selling microchip technology to China. So instead of invent it themselves, they see an opportunity here. Need software and equipment for your new chip industry? Get it from the US. Need fancy chip designs and software? US companies have you covered. Need those high-tech chips produced for your military projects? American companies will sell them to you. And yes, TSMC in Taiwan will make them for you. Wait, China's using US technology to get ahead of US technology? What? In 2021, the Washington Post reported that China was building super advanced laboratories to test scary new weapons, including nukes. And guess what? They were using American semiconductor tech to do this. It started to become clear that American companies were selling tech and chips and software to Chinese tech companies that were actually just a front for the military. Wow. Yikes. The US chip industry is now allowing China to get ahead. This was starting to happen, but I think what really woke up the US is when this happened.
Huge step forward in China's military.
China conducted 2 tests of a hypersonic missile system.
Technology that would allow it to fire a nuclear warhead faster than anyone else.
The U.S. does not currently have the ability to even track this weapon, much less defeat it.
US military generals wake up one morning to discover that China has just tested a new weapon. A missile that flew around the entire world, going 5 times the speed of sound, a mile a second. Oh, and it's really hard to see because it flies below radar range. It's super nimble, maneuverable, and has the ability to carry nukes. The US had been working on something similar, but China beat them to it by years. And it was American microchip technology that helped them build it. Oh, shit. Yikes. This totally caught them off guard.
Says that US intelligence services had no idea that China was so far ahead.
So it turns out that while the US government thought that they were running faster and that they were fine, they were actually fueling the rise of their biggest rival by giving them the technology that they need to get ahead. So the US decides that they've got to do something. China is ahead on these missiles, and they might get ahead on things like AI, and they're doing it with our tech. No more free trade, no more free markets. The government is jumping back into the chip game to sort this out.
Fundamental change is taking place today, politically, economically, and technologically.
All right, Joe Biden's like rolling up his sleeves. He's like, what do we do here? Step 1, cut them off. No more chips for China.
The Biden administration published a large set of export controls on Friday in order to slow Beijing's technological and military advances.
The restrictions will limit Chinese companies' access to advanced computer chips.
Wow.
This is the farmer's dog, and I'm a huge fan of the farmer's dog. If you guys didn't know that by now, but I love that they...
When you live in a capitalist society, those companies are going to look at the profit and they're going to sell it to the highest bidder or a bidder or anyone who wants to buy it. And when you prioritize profit over military competition, then you're inviting damage to your own country. So those companies that did it, thanks. You know, you endangered America, but at the same time, that's our system. So everyone has a role to play, and we all did a terrible job if it turns out to be like this. So now you're scrambling to figure it out, and it's just like,
And here we are back in the fun bureaucratic paperwork. Department of Commerce, Bureau of Industry and Security, docket number 220930-0204, RIN 0674. Certain advanced computing and semiconductor manufacturing items, supercomputers, and semiconductor end use, entity list modification. I'm not gonna go through this. This is just a bunch of rules that says no more chips to China. All those cutting edge chips that China was buying from US companies, blocked.
The restrictions will limit Chinese companies' access to advanced computer chips.
Manufacturing equipment they need to make their own chips, blocked. All that US made vital software that Chinese companies need to design their own chips, block, block, block.
We will bring these jobs back to our shores and end our dependence on foreign chips.
In fact, the Biden administration went super far to say that any company globally that uses US tech to produce chips is now blocked from doing business with Chinese firms.
To cut China off from certain semiconductor chips made anywhere in the world with US equipment.
Why stop there? Americans are now forbidden from working for Chinese chip companies. This is huge news. Like, this is huge news. This is happening. This is like, we're in the middle of this right now. But let's go back to that visual of the whole supply chain. If you cut off this, then yeah, you hurt China, but you also hurt the other side of this line, US chip makers. Like, one example, this US chip maker, NVIDIA. They went from selling tons of chips to China to suddenly being banned from doing so. This has led to a $400 million loss in revenue in just one quarter. Poof, up in smoke. One of the biggest chip makers now totally cut off from their big customer because Joe Biden is afraid of the Chinese military, and for good reason. Which leads to step 2 of this policy. The Biden administration wasn't going to leave these tech companies out dry, so they gave billions of dollars to American chip makers to say, hey, yeah, sorry we cut you off from your main customer because we're kind of getting scared of their military, but we have to protect our chips. Here's a bunch of money. Congress passed the CHIPS Act, which gives billions.
yeah, I would say take those companies, invest money into them, and have them produce chips. But those chips, you know, you're going to go through that process of them going to Taiwan and be made. But if it's sent to Taiwan, it comes back to us. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with having, well, never mind. I was going to say I don't think there's anything wrong with having a stockpile of chips, but why would you've made the chips for a certain reason, so to stockpile it for, let's say, the next edition phone, where you're going to make another chip that's going to have more semiconductors in it, so that's pointless. I don't know.
Billions of dollars to these companies to create fabs back in the United States.
This time it wasn't Russia, but China, another rival power, would get way ahead of us if we didn't pull out all the stops. And this legislation is the first large step in pulling out all of those stops.
Government wants the fabs to come home to ensure that this most valuable technology isn't.
Doesn't that hurt Taiwan now? And if it hurts Taiwan, then it kind of cuts Taiwan off, which now makes them, you know, I mean, the chip transfer is what secured them against a Chinese invasion, because we would be there. Well, now if you sever that tie, the reliance on them is gone. We would still defend them, but we lost a big reason. Man, wow.
Solely reliant on outside countries. And we're talking giant payouts. 50 billion taxpayer dollars go to companies like Intel, which is now opening a new fab in Ohio.
We are going to build the most advanced stuff in the world right here in Ohio.
Or even TSMC themselves, which is based in Taiwan, but is now opening a new fab in Arizona.
Okay.
Keep it in the family. Okay, so they've moved. They're doing it here, but it's still okay. So yeah. This is economic war. And the Biden administration just did a huge move. Reminder that the reason why this is important is because it's not just about like business or even missiles. This is about chips. Chips are not just chips. Chips are the future. Chips are power. Yes, chips mean economic growth and new cool technology, but chips also mean new weapons. Chips are the currency of geopolitical power. Kind of like what oil used to be, but now it's freaking silicon with a bunch of on and off switches on it.
Oil, vinegar, no, not vinegar. Oil, as in petroleum. Oil, as in olive oil. Maybe vinegar, but I don't think so. Salt, spices. There have been wars over something. Always, hold on, let me start over here. There have been wars over something throughout history. And now it sounds like semiconductors is the new war. And water's on there too. Fresh water.
The US is taking control of its valuable resource and cutting China off. So the US makes this big move, cuts China off. And this is geopolitical conflict. They just made the move. The ball's in China's court now. How will they respond? And this is where Taiwan comes back into the picture. Taiwan, this small country that finds itself in the crossfires of this conflict. 92% of all advanced chips are made here, mostly by TSMC. The US is totally reliant on them. A few months before the Biden administration was doing all of this, making it illegal to sell chips to China, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. Not just to shake hands with political leaders, no. She was there to visit TSMC, the chip fab. What Pelosi was really doing here was signaling to Taiwan that they are vital to American security. The US relies on this and will protect it.
Came to Taiwan to make unequivocally clear we will not abandon our commitment to Taiwan, and we are proud of our enduring friendship.
And in doing so, she shows us what China's countermove might be in all of this. It might be Taiwan.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes, that's the commitment we made.
Okay, but wait, what this doesn't mean is China's going to invade Taiwan and take all the chips or take over the fab or something. That scenario doesn't make any sense. If China invaded Taiwan, all they would find is a bunch of empty fabs if they weren't bombed already. They wouldn't know how to operate them. They wouldn't have all of the engineers and the software and all of the supply chain stuff that they would need to actually make chips. They would likely be fighting a war, and the US would probably get involved. I made a whole video about it. You can go check it out. Anyway, the effective countermove here for China would be to operate right on the edge.
Anybody want me to watch that video and react to it? If I haven't. I've done one of his videos before, but I don't remember what it was. Son of a bitch, I'm going to have to go find out. If I've already done it, then I'm feeling really stupid.
Of active warfare to strike back at the US without provoking a military response. This is how big nuclear powers do it. They don't actually clash, they want to just sort of poke at each other. One scenario would be China sending a bunch of its Navy ships to set up in the ocean right around here, creating a kind of partial blockade. They could stop cargo ships that are coming to and from the island, kind of just slowing everything down, but really holding the silicon hostage.
A naval blockade in today's time, I believe, it's considered an act of war. We did it to Cuba, but what did we call it? We called it an embargo or something like that instead of what the hell did I just say? I don't remember. I've already lost my train of thought. Anyways, it's considered an act of war now. We did it to Cuba, but we call it something else. And yeah, well, everybody knows about the Cuban Missile Crisis. If you haven't seen the movie 13 Days, that's a great movie. It's got Kevin Costner and the other guys, but it's a really good movie.
Making it hard for the supply chain to actually work. I mean, just remember the COVID-19 chip shortage or supply chain shortage, or even the Suez Canal blockage from a couple years ago. Yes. Imagine those supply chain issues, but on steroids, totally debilitating and being used for a hostile purpose to strike back at the US. Like Biden.
But I apologize for all the pausing, but if there is a TMC, I already forgot the name of it, in Arizona, then doesn't that mean that all they have to do is just in the U.S. just send those chips to the plant in Arizona, and then from there it could be sent back out. So you wouldn't have to send it all the way to Taiwan, is what I'm saying, to come all the way back. But I guess you would need multiple plants in order to process all those orders. Yeah.
Forbidding American companies to sell chips to China, the blockade would be a way to strike at your nuclear-armed rival without going too far, without risking too much escalation or a miscalculation.
It's incumbent upon us to stay number one. To lead the world in future industries and protect our national security.
We are going to build the most advanced stuff in the world.
That's where we're at. We're in the middle of another economic war between big nuclear powers. We don't know what happens next, but one thing that feels clear to me is that Cold War vibes are back, as these two great powers with different ideologies about the world compete with each other. This fight over chips will continue. And this idea in international relations that I kind of took for granted, which is that like globalization and interdependence is good and will lead to less conflict, it's being seriously challenged. Economic interdependence is being used as a weapon. That's what we're seeing here. And not just here. I made a video a couple months ago about how Vladimir Putin is cutting off natural gas to Europe. Frankly, it's not that much different than Joe Biden cutting off microchips to China. I mean, it is different in a lot of ways, blah, 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 we get it. But like the big mechanics of how this conflict is playing out is peculiar and is becoming a part of how conflict looks today. So even as this old school style war continues to rage in Ukraine, we're seeing an evolution of how conflict works in our world. Where once a lot of conflict revolved around natural resources like oil most recently, the currency of power, we've moved to an era where a magical piece of metal-like substance called silicon, pulsing ones and zeros, is kind of the new oil, the new currency of power, the new thing that we should protect to protect our military supremacy. So in a big shift of the trend of globalization, countries are now turning inward to protect their stuff, leading to a new era of distrust, severed connection, and rising tensions. Okay. Semiconductors is over. That's it. I'm now going to eat a Reese's Peanut Butter Cup from Trader Joe's. Wow, it's good. Okay, that's the end of the video. Thanks to Scalar one more time for sponsoring this video. There's a link in the description.
Yeah, I'll have to check out that U.S.-China conflict thing. But yeah, I'm gonna end this here. I asked a lot of questions. I do apologize for that. I wasn't even drinking, and I was pausing it and talking a lot. I talked more than he did the whole goddamn video. All right, I'm gonna end this here. So you can all put your panties back on. Video's over. Like and subscribe.